Hello again, everybody. This is Carol, your host. I am going to be interviewing Arienne today. Arienne is a California teacher, and she recently went and gave a speech in front of the Assembly Education Committee on June 26 against Bill AB 1955. This bill would mandate that teachers are not allowed to tell parents if their child wants to change their pronouns or their name to the opposite sex. This is a bill that would be keeping secrets from parents. It would establish this in law. So Ariane is a teacher, like I said. She went and she gave a 2-minute speech as well as answering questions at the assembly. I will start this interview off with going ahead and playing her 2-minute speech because I think it's really important to hear it for yourself. And then we'll get into the interview. If you'd like to support my channel, you can do so through a paid subscription to my Substack, or you can buy me a coffee. All links will be in the comment section / show notes. Thanks.
I'm a progressive Democrat, and I have been a CTA high school teacher for 22 years. I am a lifelong LGBT activist. I am a mother of a formerly trans-identified son. 10 years ago, no students identified as transgender. Now, every class has at least a few students who identify as something other than their own sex. My son's trans identity was a result of anxiety, loneliness, and too much time on the internet, like so many other youth. Sadly, these children who reject their sex believe that they were born wrong and dissociate with their natural bodies, which results in a downward spiral of their already fragile mental state. We as teachers are told, trained, mandated to accept the child's pronouncement at face value and keep this secret from parents. We game the students' records to automatically change names and pronouns depending upon the recipient and lie to parents. Senators said teachers do not want to be the gender police. That is true. Teachers also do not want to be liars or co-conspirators in the social transition of students. Parents should be trusted to make decisions for their own kids. We should not be making an assumption of guilt about parents when it comes to their own children. Teachers should nurture, not obstruct, the parent-child bond. Teachers are evaluated on how well we value and respect students' families and their role. AB 1955 obliterates that mutual respect. The Senate was filled with coming out stories, and the bill's author erroneously equates coming out as gay to the adoption of a transgender identity. Being gay carries no chance of irreversible medicalization to fit a sense of self, nor does it require active deception by schools.
Your time is up. Please wrap up.
In children, trans ideation is almost always accompanied by other serious mental health issues. Secrecy from parents is not the answer. This
Please
bill
wrap
will
up.
only hurt children.
Thank you.
Vote no, and thank you.
Hello, everyone. So today I have an interview with Ariane. So she recently spoke about AB 1955, which is a bill making its way through California right now. It was a committee meeting, and they took public speakers as well as people coming up to the mic to, give a yay or a nay on the proposed bill. And I watched it, and I thought she did a very good job speaking from the perspective of a teacher, a mother, and, a woman. And so I wanted her to come on and talk to me a little bit about her experience, how she got here. And yeah, so welcome, Ariane. Thank you for coming on the channel and Substack.
All right. Well, thank you, Carol. I really appreciate your channel, and I appreciate your interviews. And you always put me in a good mood, even though these are tough, difficult issues, very much.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I got involved. I am a teacher, longtime teacher in California, and public school teacher, high school teacher, and I survived the pandemic and online learning and at home, but I also, as a mother, my son, who was 15, 16 years old at the time, came to me when it was time to go back to school, didn't want to go back to school, and came to me and said that he thought he might be a girl. And so I just, as a very pragmatic teacher and mother, I was just like, everybody's nervous about going back to school. Everybody's got things that they're worried about or, that they hate about themselves. And it's just everybody has their thing. You might think that you would prefer to be female and another person wishes that they, had different hair or were taller or short, whatever. There's just, all teenagers are freaked out about something about themselves. And
Very true.
that's just totally normal. But I bet you're going to feel a lot better when you go back to school. You really are. You just need to start like going back. And we all do. I'm like, I'm going back, and even though not all my students are coming back, the ones that do come, we get to have like a nice time in between the classes. And it's really important for you to like go back to socializing in person. And I think it'll be healthy. And he did go back, just a few days left in the semester, but and he was happy that he did so. But this persistent feeling that he was born wrong continued. So I had to go down the rabbit hole and figure out what was going on. And at that time, this was a few years ago, trying to think, 2021, there was not very much for me to find. Everything was very affirmative,
Yeah.
and I needed to affirm him as a girl. But yet everything that he was saying to me just sounded like he'd lifted it off the internet somewhere. Like it did not, my son seemed further and further away. Like there was something going on that was not him.
Is your son straight or gay? Do you know?
So I believe now he seems to be straight, but I actually think he's probably bi, maybe.
Okay.
I mean, his father definitely is. And I was always bi curious and so we've been a very LGB friendly family. His father was probably had, his first relationships were all with other boys, guys, men. And so I don't know, we raised our son to be very gender nonconforming and do what he wanted to do and all of these things. And interestingly, now I don't even think you can do that without people assuming that your kid is trans if they like to play with
And
toys.
it's also funny.
The opposite gender.
It's also kind of funny that you guys did all this, yet it didn't seem to inoculate him from this identifying as the sex he's not. It's
Oh no, he was absolutely not inoculated. And in fact, a lot of the things that he would say to me would just like, I was like, well, if you're going to be female, you're going to be a feminist. And that means that you don't actually have to shave your legs. And it means that you need to like read the feminists and you need to, I was just not having it. I was like, the first time he bought, like he put some clothes on that were female, they were very anime and sexy. And I was like, you know what? I'm like one of those people. I was wearing fishnets in high school in the 80s. Like I was wildly inappropriate. I remember going to the mall in the 80s and I was wearing like a little like Madonna bra and like some sort of jacket over it. And my mom was like, I'm not going to the mall with you. And she was a total hippie who didn't want to like tell me what to wear or what not to wear. And even she was like, you are crossing the line. You can't wear a bra to the mall. And I was kind of like, oh, my kid is crossing the line. But this is not coming from this place of being like a rebellious cool kid or goth kid or all the things that I was part of, the music scene, the alternative scene. This was coming from like a misunderstanding of what it is to be female. And I think
this was your introduction then into trans
was my introduction.
Had you, 2021, there was already quite a few, if you were a teacher, you probably came across trans identified kids already, right?
Not really. Like
what grades are you teaching?
I teach 9 through 12.
Okay.
So not really that many. There were a couple of girls who identified as male before that. And then I had a kid the year before, who like I teach, there's a large Polynesian community where I teach. And there was one Polynesian, guy who was clearly like an effeminate gay guy who talked about his boyfriend all the time, but he would come in with like these long nails and like dye parts of his hair and things like that, and it's like sort of fa'afafine territory, right? And And he would say, I'm a she, I'm a they, I'm a, he would go back and forth. And I'm fine with kids playing around with all of that. Where it crosses the line for me is that we're going to make this official and we're going to hide it from your parents. I'm like, you know what, kids, go play with makeup, go play with how you dress, go play with your gender expression, go play with all of it. I certainly did. All of my friends did.
I don't know about you, but I think the difference for me is that it's medicalized,
Yeah,
right?
it's medicalized.
Identity is one thing. There's always been, subcultures and weirdos and everything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But the difference is now you're medicalizing this, and now
yeah,
you're telling people they're in the wrong body. Now you're
yeah,
making profit off of them, and now
yeah,
you're actually uh, medicalizing people as a treatment, as an actual medical treatment, and
yeah.
that's just no, that's the line, you know.
It's a huge line, and it's the line that people, teachers I work with and a lot of people that I know just don't understand.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
that's just why I have to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with people. I'm like, that student who wants to be known by male name and male pronouns might actually just be a lesbian who's having a hard time accepting herself as a lesbian, or she's just having a hard time accept, like, just in the milieu of high school and like who she is, and this is like a way to escape from herself. And as somebody who also had a really hard time in high school, I get that. And I brought a lot of that, sort of that experience and empathy when I was trying to navigate things with my son,
mhm.
um, and try to help him, like, and I developed some new terminology for myself and my colleagues. I'm like, we need to help kids radically love themselves. Like, let's talk about
Yeah,
radical self-love,
yeah.
radical self-acceptance. And that
So
is
okay,
not
so
what you
you
see in the trans movement.
yes, okay, so
If
you
that
did
that language is used to medicalize, not to accept one's body.
right, it's backwards.
Yeah, it's backwards.
So as is most of the ideology, it's very twisted.
Yeah.
So you so before your son, you didn't actually really have a lot of experience with the trans stuff necessarily. It was kind of peripheral or maybe from your generation, not what's happening right now in the
Yeah,
younger
it was very
generation.
peripheral.
Okay.
And I think one of the first articles I read that where I was like, "Oh, good, other people are noticing that something is not right here," was an article. It was, is it Laura Anderson? Who is the trans woman, psychologist, psychotherapist in the Bay Area? She was working in the Bay Area, and she was part of WPATH. I'm saying her
I
name
don't
wrong. It's Laura
yeah, I don't I
something.
know I kind of know who you're talking about, but I don't
Yeah.
know his name.
Anyway, and it was pushing back, saying, I mean, he was saying there's something's not right with these kids. We actually need to give them more um, psychotherapy first, and before we medicalize them. Like, and he's pointed to the social contagion aspect of it, and I was like, oh, thank goodness. And I also have a lot of feminist friends, and actually starting to talk to them. They were seeing the same things. They thought it was all crazy. A lot of them had kids my age, or they were professors, or they were lesbians. And like, one of them gave me the whole history of what happened at Mitch Fest and the incursion of males into Mitch Fest, males identifying as lesbians. And I had heard of these things, like your gender and your sexuality can be two different things, and you can be, and I never paid it too much attention. I should have been, but I didn't. But then once I started doing the research and talking to these people, thankfully I have a lot of really very well read, educated feminist women in my milieu who also, have been part of the so-called, sex positive culture from the 90s, or queer culture, or LGBT communities. And, they were all helping me understand. We were all having a lot of conversations, unpacking this together.
Mhm.
Couple of teacher friends and I, were seeing so many of just not only our kids, but our friends' kids thinking that they were born in the wrong body. It was definitely very much part of like these leftist liberal families where
Yeah.
we had already taught our kids, you can be whoever you want to be, and you can like whatever you want to, and fall in love with whoever you want to love. And somehow it was our kids that were seeking a new marginalized identity, seeking to get out of their skin, hating their puberty, just hating it. And this was the new way to deal with it.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's definitely in the left?
Um, well, I don't, it's hard to get into the weeds. And I think a lot of people have talked about this now, where there's a real focus on identity now, and identity
Mhm.
politics, and needing to be part of a marginalized group in order to even feel like you count. So I do think that some of our kids who were raised to be, social justice warriors, my kid certainly was. I mean, he went to marches on immigrants' rights with me. Um, and and I think that he felt like he needed to be part of something too. And so I think that all of these things kind of like combined, and maybe 2020 was an explosion of like everybody, all the kids and all the parents were suddenly online all the time.
Mm.
And so I think it exploded at that point. It
So
really did.
it's so interesting that your perspective is it exploded then, and for
Yeah, I
me,
know
I'm
that for
like,
some people this was happening way long ago. I
I would see
wasn't.
now. I thought 2015 was the explosion. To be
Oh,
honest,
yeah,
that's when the whole trans stuff really seemed to boom bust out
yeah.
there, and that's where you started to definitely see the kids being brought into it big
So
time.
I definitely I did see that in 2015. I think that was the first year that like there was a girl who was identifying as a boy and then as a they at my school. Wasn't one of my students, but definitely in the group of the kids that I always like the best are all of those alternative creative types. I ran the creative writing club for several years. And so some of those kids would pop in and out, and I just was like, oh, that's interesting. And the school was having to discuss it, like which locker room. And like the boys don't want her in there. The boys don't want him in there because it's uncomfortable, and it should be uncomfortable for her. And like she was a boy, but then she was wearing dresses and she had a boyfriend. And it was just I don't know. I
Oh
just thought it
Lord,
was all like
oh
a
those.
way of, I was like, okay, these are all the ways that like we were expressing ourselves in silly ways,
Yeah.
but this is now becoming like a movement, and like the whole school is having to bend to the will of this
So
child that did not was not doing well mentally. There was
yeah.
definitely some issues there.
So I have an idea about why maybe this exploded more on the left. First of all, it just kind came out of that. That's
Yeah.
LGB community got taken over by the T, and so that
Oh yeah.
so it's the Trojan horse situation. One, but
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, do you think that perhaps we gave our kids too much leeway, not
Oh yeah.
enough to rebel against?
Oh, for
And
sure.
so it's one of those situations where the kid's like, "Wait a minute, hold my beer. I'm going to do something even crazier."
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And
Yeah.
actually, I even talked about that in uh, my teacher credential program. I went to the Stanford teacher education program um, many, many years ago. And I remember at one point, it was all about doing all of these things to like create these communities with our students, which I do think is really important. There's like, you have to feel comfortable in order to learn. You do. And there's a lot of like studies around that. But then there's like, where's the line between I'm the authority in the classroom and you don't get to know everything about me, and hey, I'm here as like, as your best friend. And there are teachers that share way too much and think and or there are teachers that are trying to create some sort of system of like everybody's empowered in the classroom equally. And I'm like, I just think that the more that you pretend that there's no hierarchy, the more you are the
Well,
hierarchy, because you are still the voice that's pushing all of these things. And I just don't like to pretend. I'm like, there's a
this
hierarchy in my classroom, is very simple. And these are the things that you should not do. It's very simple. And I do think that the boundaries are important. And
yeah.
the stricter sometimes I think the boundaries are, the more comfortable most kids are, because
Yeah.
then they know that they're safe because then somebody can't get away with doing something crappy to them.
Maybe we've learned a lesson here. Adults do have to be in charge. Adults do need to be in the house, and no, kids don't run the show. And
Yeah.
no is a perfectly reasonable thing to tell your child.
Yeah. I remember talking about that when my son was very young. And I remember reading the books, and I was reading the Sears books and these gentle parenting books. And I was like, my kid is like 18 months old and is like hitting other kids and throwing things. And these sort of nice ways of dealing with it are not working.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I found the naughty step and Super Nanny and some of these other people that had a very different approach. And I just started using that approach, and I was like, oh, this works. Actually, this gets my kid.
Yeah.
You know, he needed a consequence. Even at the tender age of 1 year old,
Absolutely.
he needed a consequence. And that's when I started kind of watching the other parents all struggling with these issues. And some of them had very nice, polite kids. I had a kid who got into everything. I had a kid who like destroyed all of the childproofing immediately, like would run into the street. I was like, no was a constant word because he was going to go kill himself.
And that's the other thing too, is, every kid is different.
Yeah.
And so what works for one may not work for the other. And I think that's the hallmark of a good parent is you got to strategize. You got to use your logic around, okay, this isn't working. What can I do there? But yeah, I do think that and we see this in every creature, even animals, right?
For sure.
A dog, for example, someone gets a dog and there's no structure to that dog's life. That dog goes bonkers. And then kids are the same thing. It's like, if there's no structure and no rules and no guide rails, kids go bonkers.
Yeah.
And I think that's
one of my really good friends is a dog trainer. Yeah. And a dog walker. And she talks about this stuff all the time with me, and like the psychology of the brain and the brainstem, and like, that humans are not that different. And
they're not.
I also see that our kids are seeking something, particularly on the left. A lot of us, like, we raised our kids to like, you can do anything. And it turns out that that's more difficult.
No. Also, your kid is very special to you, but they're not special to the world. And that's a lesson that has to be learned very quickly.
That's true.
Okay, so we've established that you're a big old lefty and come from the left. Yeah. And so you started to see this stuff happen. The stuff happen with your son, and that kind of woke you up and got you into this, like, analyzing this and looking at this for what it was, or and then what was kind of the next step when you probably went down a rabbit hole and then found out other stuff. And how did you get connected with the feminist kind of activist?
Well, they were always my friends. That's the thing. Like, once this started happening with my son and I started talking to people, and there was one particular woman who is a longtime sort of leftist lesbian activist, and she'd had two girlfriends who had become trans men. She just told me all of the things and the history of Mitch Fest. And she's quite an academic, and she helped me really understand that this has been going on for a long time in the lesbian world. And I was like, I wish I had realized that. I had read articles over the years, but didn't really put it all together. But I was
what year when did she have this conversation with you? Like, what year were you aware of this?
This was probably 2021 when my son, when my son was first coming out. I just started talking to a lot of my female friends about it, how crazy it all seemed to me. I mean, I was like every other ROGD mom out there. I was like desperately alone, afraid, knew that my kid was like talking like he was in a cult, didn't know how to pull him out, and I'm the kind of person that talks to people, and I try to like find out what I can from them. I mean, I got really good advice from people that didn't know the whole story. Like, there was a Spanish woman that I worked with who said, that one of her kids had gone through a really hard time years before. And one of the things that really helped him manage it and get better was that their family just started doing things that they had done when he was younger, like happy family moments, and just kind of going back to those places. And I was like, okay, so with my husband, We went to the train museum in Sacramento. Like, we just started doing things that we remember. We always had such a great time as a family, but we had to really navigate very, very carefully. And that was part of it, is that you can't just tell your kid, okay, you're crazy. Like, that's not going to work. I mean, maybe that does work in terms of like the rebellious aspect of it. Like, okay, well, I'm going to just even be more trans. It was like the careful conversations here and there, dropping just a bit of wisdom here, or being like, okay, well, maybe you should research this other thing.
Why do you feel like you had to be careful?
Because of, it is absolutely the job of adolescents to rebel at that age and to become independent. So you don't want to give them this perfect opportunity to like completely mistrust you. Like, I wanted to like have him have some space to go dress as a girl. It's like, I mean, that's just all interesting. Sure. Like, I don't care. Like, I thought it was but it was the insistence that he needed to go medicalize that, freaked me out. I was like, this would not be a thing if he wanted to go dress up in women's clothes or girls' clothes or whatever.
I guess what I'm trying to, I guess
And
what I'm
not like
trying,
crazy,
yeah.
but
I guess what I'm trying to ask here, because I've heard this seems to be a fear from other parents, is they feel like they really can't set
Yeah.
the boundaries
Yeah.
because the school and the doctors and even child protective services in California might come after you.
So I wasn't as afraid of that.
Okay.
He was going to a private school. We were in total communication with the school. They had even, I mean, because it's a private school that has a lot of sort of leftist liberal parents, they'd been going through this for a while with lots of kids. And so they had actually kind of had a really good strategy of like making sure that he was going to be okay if he got misgendered. Like, I was like, okay, well, they kind of know the drill, because at my school, like, we're being told, oh, you can't ever misgender a child, it'll be the worst thing ever.
Oh,
And
so
then
there's some different policies happening with
there's
public
some different
versus
policies, but
private
I'm in a
school.
public school and this was a private school. The private school
Okay.
has kind of seen this over and over again with a lot of their kids. Probably my school being sort of more working class, we don't have as many, but we do have them. So I think that was one of the things, but it wasn't, for me, it was the relationship.
Okay.
Like, and his father as well, and his father and I trying to deal with it, like, between each other. Are we going to use female pronouns? Are we going to go along with a new name? What is the right choice? And again, this was sort of like, not a lot had been published at that point, but then I started listening to Gender: A Wider Lens, and that helped me a lot. Just interview after interview. Gender: A Wider Lens podcast was really informative for me. And I really appreciated the Quillette articles by Angus Fox on boys. Like, all of those things were like, ding, 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 ding. This is exactly what's going on. A lot of the articles were being printed at the same time that I was dealing with this with my son. And I was talking to people that had been dealing with their kids before there was anything online. And they were like, and I was sharing articles with them, and they were like, I wish I'd had access to this because I just went along with it. Yeah, my daughter's been on testosterone. My daughter's doing this. Like, I went along with the pronouns starting in 8th grade with my daughter. Just so many stories where people, and also in retrospect, I would have dealt with it differently, probably would have said no much more firmly at the beginning. I just thought it was some sort of like experimental thing that kids were doing.
Yeah, I guess that's
certainly
a good point.
Isn't. Yeah,
that's a good point. The other thing is there is a generational divide, right? So
yeah,
if you're in your 50s and you came out of what you considered experimentation, you're not going to maybe realize that this is serious. This is medicalization serious. This isn't just experimenting with things that you can change your mind about later.
yeah. And I do talk to a lot of particularly the men, and some of the gay men, and some of the bisexual men, and some of the men that were, we were all out there together in the 90s going through all of these things. And they have a really hard time understanding that this is not just another form of experimentation.
That's
I mean,
what I've
it
noticed.
shocks me with the gay men. I'm like, you realize that this is not transphobia. This is like Jazz Jennings is coming from probably a homophobic family. Like these kids are being castrated at a young age, and
Yeah.
it's really happening.
Yeah.
And they
So
don't get it.
my
Yeah.
unpopular opinion about that is men generally don't care about others, to be honest. Men
Mm.
are generally very self-involved. Well, they are.
I
And
mean, I have had success with men. I will say that there have been men who have been like, "Oh, yeah,
some, yes, but
okay, I get it now." Yeah,
culturally speaking, who does the emotional labor?
I know. Yeah.
Women
And
do.
who helped the men during AIDS? You know,
Women
I'm just
do.
like, I
So
know.
I think men are not, I don't know how much biology, how much nurture nature versus, that nonsense, but I do think that culturally speaking, they are not really cued into the betterment and the welfare of others, right?
Mm.
They also don't raise kids. They don't have babies, and that makes a difference.
Well, the other thing is that some of the people have pushed back against me because they're like, "Well, this isn't actually happening to teenagers." And I'm like, "Oh, yes, it is."
No, it absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I have to go dig up and find, like, some statistics, and I'm like, "Yeah, these surgeries, it's n" and the surgeries are one piece of the pie, but if you start looking at puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones
Yeah.
on, like, people starting at age 12, you'd be astonished, and we're literally stopping the cognitive development and sexual development of these kids, and I'm like, "Isn't sex important? Isn't it a human right?"
Yeah.
Like,
To
let's
leave
talk about
to allow your
clitorectomy.
body to
Let's talk
exist.
I
Yeah.
mean, where are we? Like, you are literally advocating for clitorectomies for an idea in people's minds.
Yeah.
I'm like, "How did we get here?" And I have to really, really show them the evidence because people don't hear this in the mainstream media. They
Yeah.
don't believe it's happening.
You
And I'm
know,
like, "Ah,
I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but when having these conversations with people and just listening,
yeah,
I've really noticed that the vast majority of people do not understand what medical transition is. They don't understand the medical side of it.
yeah,
They really are focused on the identity part of it.
yeah,
And obviously the propaganda worked, but they are
yeah,
not clued in to what is actually happening medically with kids
yeah,
and adults that go through this.
yeah." And so on top of that, there's this confusion. So there's a couple of confusions. One is there's obviously the conflation that a gay person is not much different from a trans person, that these are two things that are very similar.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how?
Yeah.
How is that similar? Um, and the other part of it is not recognizing the medicalization of it and that you're actually taking away the right for a sexual future in a young person and a relationship and the potential relationship of that young person when you start messing around with their sexual development. But there's this misunderstanding just of that of just child development in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we don't let kids do tons of things.
Right.
Like I'm like, how did teachers and psychologists get bamboozled by this? Like, how do we not understand the stages of human development and child development and adolescent development?
How do you think?
I,
What do you think happened? What's your take?
I do think it's the forced teaming of the trans identity into LGB
Trojan
and
horse stuff.
yeah, the Trojan horse stuff more than anything else. And people like literally like you've probably seen this too, where there are examples of a person who thinks that, well, an effeminate gay boy probably would have a happier life as a girl rather than ending up a gay man. And a gay man is the only one that can dispel that. Like, I'm not going to be able to change that person's mind, but maybe a gay man can, which is why I feel like we've got to educate the gay men. Like the UK has a lot of gay men standing up for women and lesbians.
Yes, they
The
do.
United States does not have so many.
Yeah.
And but I'm like, we cannot create all of these eunuch gay men. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, wake up and protect. If nothing else, if you're not going to protect the lesbians or the just gender nonconformity in
Protect your
general,
own.
protect your own.
Protect your own.
Like, wake up and protect the boys, if nothing else.
Yeah. Okay, so
Which is why I can't handle. I'm like, Scott Wiener, what are you doing?
oh god.
Yeah, I actually brought in a group of us, parents, ROGD parents, lesbian, bisexual adults in his district to his office to talk about all of this. He didn't come into the room with us. We had to talk to the LGBT person who was a gay man. And we talked for an hour and we shared our stories. I wrote it up. It's like, it's all out there. And nothing, like, they're not interested. His office is not interested in hearing about young gay boys who get castrated or young lesbians or young I guess that's the other thing. It's like, people think that gender nonconforming means trans and that there's no difference. And I'm like, how did we get here? And I want the two-spirit communities to wake up too.
Yeah.
You know,
Because
like,
the
the two-spirit community, the Mushe, the Fafafine, you guys are getting used
I know.
to transition and medically, medically take away the sexual function of young people. And you need to wake up and know what's going on.
That's something that's not that's something that's
kids.
not understood, and people really need to understand there is no such thing as a sex change operation. It's impossible.
Yeah, no, there's cosmetic. There's cosmetic changes only.
And what is happening is once that genitalia is cut into, it no longer functions. It will not function. I'm sorry, but there is absolutely zero possibility that you can have, we're not born with a penis. You cannot have one constructed. It will not work. It will not have sensation. I mean, anybody who's had a basic surgery knows that any surgery, anytime you cut the flesh, you lose sensation and you have long-term difficulties. That's the way nerves work. It's the way body works. What do you think is going to happen when you cut into genitalia, which is the most sensitive part of the human body?
Yeah.
There's no, you're not going to have, you're done.
I know.
And that's something I think
people I know, just as we age and it's like, oh, now I had to have this surgery here. I had to do this and now I'm numb. And now I'm like, these are just the things we deal with as we age normally. I'm like, you do not want to age with your genitalia in jeopardy or your urinary tract in jeopardy.
Even in the best case situations, it's still chronic pain. It's still chronic upkeep. It's the unknown of the future and a less fulfilling sex life. There is no way you're having the same level of sex life you did before because you just can't. It's impossible. It's scientifically impossible.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to just share before we go on is, like, just as a teacher, me trying to unpack, actually some of these girls are actually lesbians, and rather than supporting their idea that it's wrong to be a lesbian or bad to be female, maybe we should build up this, self-identity as a lesbian or self-identity as girl and girl power again, rather than saying, yeah, it's better to be a boy. We're going to affirm you in that. And we're going to keep that a secret from your parents. Like, I like very few people that I work with, and particularly I think if you have kind of led like sort of a normal heterosexual life, you don't even understand what same-sex attraction is or how it's different from feeling that you're born in the wrong body. Like, all of that is like very similar to you, I think, because they're so alien maybe from your experience. So that's where I try to like kind of clear that up for people or explain that that's actually, those are two very different things, and that we might actually be damaging lesbian identities at our school if we're so engaged in uplifting trans identities. Like, I talked to an elementary school teacher at I'm part of CTA, California Teachers Association, and at the last state council meeting down in LA, I talked to an elementary school teacher who told me about a kindergarten teacher she worked with who has an effeminate little boy in the kindergarten class who they're like, well, what should this teacher do? Like, the teacher feels that they need to talk to the parents about that this is a trans kid. And I'm like, what? this is just a boy who likes to play with the girl things, like, or whatever, the so-called girl things. Like, why would this be a problem that needs a solution called trans? Why can't we just let kids be kids? She's like, well, we need an education on this because I don't even know that. And I'm like, we just need to go back 10 or 15 years when we just allowed kids to be kids. The education seems to be making people in my profession think that there's a problem when there is none. And that's a huge issue for me. I'm like, if I am now hearing from elementary school teachers that they need to trans kids in kindergarten based on the toys that they like to play with, we are in a really bad situation.
So
Anyway, sorry.
this kind of makes me think of my crazy ideas I had a few years ago that seem to be coming true. The
Yeah.
the state has found a way to eradicate homosexuals.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you're doing away with us.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That is pure erasure of all gender nonconforming children.
yeah.
And as we know, not all, but a lot of gay people were gender nonconforming as children.
So that's what I wanted to say when you were talking about how different the
Yeah.
trans and the gay thing. I think in some ways it isn't, and that's where it gets
Yeah.
confusing because
Yeah.
many a lesbian, especially a butch lesbian,
Mhm.
has struggled with what is categorized as gender dysphoria. It's very common among us to have that for
Yeah.
obvious reasons, but
Yeah.
and very effeminate or gender nonconforming men have also struggled with these feelings, and a lot of times these feelings of being wrong or should have been the other sex happen very young
Yeah.
because we're different. Right? We're
Yeah.
trying to place ourselves somewhere, and the only place we seem to be able to place ourselves, like what archetype we have to pick, is the
Mm.
opposite sex,
Yeah.
right? So in
Yeah.
a way, some of this is linked,
Yes.
and that's where it gets a little confusing, right?
Yeah. And I think that that's what I try to explain to people. Yes, a lot of kids that are supposedly gender nonconforming or like things, that supposedly the opposite sex is supposed to like, they may end up gay. Now, how do we support them in just being okay with that? That's where I go to radical self-acceptance and radical
Yeah.
self-love.
Yeah, and
And
how
that
do you
means no hormones, no medicalization. That means we accept people as they are.
yeah, and
I think that that's what the trans community keeps saying, that's their messaging, but I'm like, you're doing that through radical mastectomies on 16-year-old girls.
yeah.
It makes no sense.
So you are involved with so you're a teacher and you're in the union too, you're involved
Oh,
with
yeah.
teacher stuff.
Yeah.
It was very impressive for you to come out publicly and go to this go in
Yeah.
and have your voice at this meeting.
Yeah.
What made you how, how are you able to be public and still hold your job? I bet some people are
Well,
probably asking that question.
there's something called tenure,
Okay.
which should protect my right to free speech. Now, I have over the course of the past 2 years, just where I work, been more and more open and talking to people. I have talked to the principal. I have talked to many teachers. I have talked to the counselors. I have talked to some of the mental health people. I have talked to some of the people at the district office. I talked to the LGBTQ advisory committee. One of my really good friends is on there, and these are all of the teachers and counselors that advise the various saga clubs and they used to be known as the Gay Straight Alliance. They have a lot of different names now. Um, but I've been talking to people one-on-one, and I do feel like my message has been received and supported by a lot of people. I'm even friends with one of the school board members, and I've talked to that person about this a lot. And again, I always go back to, we have to support the kids to be who they are, but we shouldn't be affirming these identities and new pronouns, because it leads to a more downward spiral of mental health. It certainly was in my own son. The more that he felt that his body did not match the new female pronouns, the more depressed he was. And the more he was online looking at all of these, femboys who were like taking drugs. And the more people I knew that were allowing their boys to do this and allowing their daughters to do this. And I was just like, what are we doing? Like,
So what would you say so it sounds like have you had a lot of pushback? Has there been some really
there's been some pushback. I'd say that there's a few people that just don't quite understand it yet, don't get it, and are not interested. Like, I think that the people that are interested, like, I actually do have real life experience in this area. I've done a lot of research. I have like a lot of different resources I share with people. And I think that kind of helps, but there's definitely some pushback. Probably even within my school, I think there are some people that are like a little bit shocked by me when I say certain things. I think that there's sort of like there's probably a lot of what we call chisme, like some gossip about, oh my God, did you hear this thing or whatever that she believes. But I do think that for the most part, I've worked really hard to be a professional teacher, to be taken seriously, to be really good at my job, to be on top of it, to be a very good communicator with students and their parents and families, to fight for what I believe in as an educator, as somebody who teaches a second language, as somebody who's an advocate for our English language learners, multilingual learners. And like, I do have a certain amount of credibility, I believe.
Okay.
So I think that helped.
Have you been called a bigot? Transphobe?
Probably behind the scenes. And yeah, definitely in a chat group with some teachers that I don't work with personal one-on-one, but it's like some people did call me a bigot at one point. Okay. Definitely, I have been, but not with the people that I'm presently working with. So I actually enjoy a pretty good collegiality with most of the people I work with.
Okay. So in talking to you here, I have to say I'm surprised because your story is kind of countering what so much is heard about how you can't speak out or you can't say anything or else you'll be immediately fired and ostracized. And like, that's not been your experience. You've been speaking out. You're not saying it's easy, but you have been doing it.
I've been careful, I think. I've been strategic. And it's not like I don't ask kids for pronouns, like that's at the beginning of the year. I'm like, I don't ask kids, what are your pronouns? Or I ask nothing. I don't want to know. Yeah. I don't want to know because I don't want to deal with that. And I kind of share that with other teachers, whether they choose to do that or not. I tell them the reasons why I don't, as a parent of a formerly trans-identified child who was probably hurt by the pronoun rituals more than anything else. There's a really good article that I share with people. I think it might have been on the Pitt Substack, but I've printed it out and given it to a lot of people. But it's about how even if you are really, truly struggling with a gender identity and your sexuality, being forced to say it to people you're forcing them to out themselves. Why would you do that? Like, what?
I mean,
that makes no logical sense whatsoever. So I'm not interested.
No, it's true. You're putting more pressure on these kids to make a decision. It's like, no, just give them some space, No.
Do we ask kids whether they're gay or not? No. It's not my business.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't want to know. And
they got to figure it out.
I mean, okay, yeah, I see you've got a girlfriend. Okay, you're probably gay. Okay, but I don't care.
Yeah.
And that's not something like, if you've got a girlfriend on campus, yay, that we've made it a safe place for you to show that openly. I'm glad for that work we did. But where this is going next is no good.
Yeah. So how did you get to go speak at this? Like, what was...
So because
how'd you get that opportunity?
Okay, so first of all, I got involved in the various parent organizations in California. Aaron Friday, who does a lot of work here in California. my lesbian friend who told me all about Mitch Fest and her trans-identified former girlfriends and things like that, and she invited me to a group. So there's a lot of different groups of supposedly we're TERFs, right?
Yeah.
That I've been involved in the city. Women Are Real in the Bay Area. And I've just formed a lot of alliances. And this is I'm passionate about all of the different issues, like the male rapists in women's prisons, the men taking away sports trophies from girls, all of those different issues. I'm interested in all of it, and women's rights in general. But my particular passion is what's happening to the young people and the kids and in the schools and in the medical industry. And so I have sort of anonymously, I've taken some actions and written some things. And last summer, there were several different bills that were going on in California. And I think I took a number of trips to the state capitol to be part of the protests. I was interviewed by the Sacramento Bee at one point. I think that they thought they were going to get a very different opinion from me because I don't look like their typical conservative Republican person, and I'm not. I'm like fighting for all the kids. I'm fighting for the gay kids. I'm fighting for all the kids. I'm fighting for gender nonconformity and creative like outlets of expression. And that's not understood. And so I just keep feeling like we have to educate people. I want to go educate the drag queens next. So I don't think they know what's going on.
Also, someone needs to tell them there's a time and a place.
There's a time and a place. Like my formative years hanging out with drag queens were always in clubs late at night, and then they were going and having sex. Like, how did this become a thing for children? I don't quite understand.
It's one of those lines where there's nothing wrong with drag queens, but there is such a thing as a separation between adult activity and child activity.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And so I have those lines for myself. So I actually spoke out. I actually spoke testimony on another bill last summer, but it was sort of one of these surreptitious ones where there was a bill introduced that we were going to include in education, that there needed to be some units around bullying. And Aaron Friday had the brilliant idea of, well, I'm going to oppose it unless it includes that part of that education for kids is not telling them that their bodies are wrong, because that is the ultimate bullying you can do. That is abuse. And I was like, that's brilliant. And I went and spoke out on that with her. And there were like my CTA brothers and sisters in the room speaking on the other side. And I got up and I told some of my story of my own child and the belief in being born in the wrong body, how it can really psychologically damage you, and how I saw that in my own household, and how we need to teach kids to radically accept themselves, no matter their body type, no matter their face, their color of their skin, their hair, their nose, all of it is one piece.
Yeah.
And to have any teacher teach that bodies are wrong, that your genitals and your sexual function is wrong, it's absolutely the worst thing you could tell a kid. And it will ruminate in their minds until they find the internet, where they're suddenly like bursting with all of these people selling, double mastectomy, selling hormones, selling AG, this sort of autogynephilia porn.
Yeah.
I'm sure, 100% sure that my son was receiving messages from older male perverts that love young men to dress up in girls' outfits. Love it. The internet is the wild, wild west, and we've got to shut it down. I mean, these perverts are they're criminal and those are the guys behind the scene telling all these kids that their bodies are wrong and how sexy they are as the opposite sex. I'm like, again, trying to unpack that for my very sort of, nice, well-educated teacher colleagues. That's not
Yeah.
an easy conversation to say, no, there's actually a lot of porn and pedophiles behind the scenes. There is true grooming. I know that we hear that word grooming and we think that that's made up, but no, it is absolutely 100% true.
I think it's definitely been overused in a certain aspect,
Yeah.
certain areas, you know.
Yeah.
Let's not widen it out so much that it doesn't mean anything anymore. So you went and spoke at this. How was that experience? Speaking.
Um, I felt, I felt, well, first of all, that speech was not 100% my own. Like, a lot of
Mhm.
people worked on it. Aaron Friday, my husband, lots of people, like, kind of like, we really had to narrow down and really be very specific because you only get 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I just
Still
want to
though.
thank all the people that helped me. But because I had all of that help, I also just felt very supported. A lot of my feminist friends were there to support me, to support the messaging, that they also came and spoke out, because afterwards, like, tons and tons of people can just go and say, yeah, no, this is who I am, and I don't support this bill. And
Yeah.
there were mothers of girls, they're like, yeah, my daughter's a lesbian. I want her to be a lesbian. I don't want her to think that she's a boy and cut off her breasts. Like, people like that were speaking out. And these are like leftists and liberals, and there were all different kinds of people. And we need to uplift those voices. And I felt like I was there with a lot of people that understand and understand this deeply and have a lot at stake. And so I felt good. Now, I had just gotten over COVID. I had just come back from a European vacation. I was exhausted, but I was very tunnel vision, and
Yeah.
I felt very prepared. What is not known is that afterwards, after, like, each person, there's two testimonies on each side, two witnesses on each side, and I was the last of the four people to go. Plus, um, Assemblymember Ward, who is a gay man who introduced this legislation. He also got to speak at the very beginning. But what I didn't realize is that the assembly members of the education committee were going to ask us questions. So I wasn't quite
Oh,
prepared for that aspect of
okay.
it, but I just went into, okay, I need to pay attention. I need to listen. I need to respond. And there were some moments when I was able to respond, I think, well, particularly because the two witnesses on the other side were also both teachers, although I don't know that either of them is currently teaching. I am struggling to understand who they were, but when they were asked these questions, they were like, well, this is all hypothetical because there are so few students doing this. And I was like, excuse me. I
Really?
have students every single year.
Wait a minute. If there's so few students, then why is it a bill?
Yeah, there's so few. Like, if if transgenderism were really only like 0.0001% of the population, this wouldn't be an issue. The
It would be
issue is
necessary.
that yeah, it'd be unnecessary. The issue is that it is a social contagion, and that so many of our kids are asking for new pronouns that we have, like, all. I have a friend who's an assistant principal at another school, and a fairly wealthy school in Silicon Valley, who told me, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I talked to you because I had 10 gender 504. 504 is sort of like a special ed plans. I had to make 10 gender plans for 10 freshmen in the space of a week.
A
I'm
gender
like,
plan.
yep, a gender plan. Because so many kids are doing this and
Yeah.
dealing with this, and their parents don't know what to do, and they're going and asking questions and going to the doctor and going to the therapist, and so many of the therapists are affirming this and the schools are
I know.
affirming this, and we're all, like, dancing around it, and it's like,
Oh,
this is not hypothetical, this is real, and I have been told to lie to parents in an email. Like, you can see the
really?
evidence of it,
Okay.
and I fought back, I pushed back, I'm like, I'm never gonna lie to a parent.
Yeah. So what I found really frustrating about when I watched this was how much the other side
Mm,
is basically lying about what this is and lying
yeah,
about why it exists. Like,
yeah,
so basically this bill would just make it would the parent, if a kid wants to change their name or pronouns at school, they have to have parental permission, right?
Right. Right. This
You
is
should
not
have,
about
they
outing a
should,
kid. This is a kid who's already out
the
to the
outing thing is just like,
1,500 or 2,000 people at school. They're out. And you're going to hide that from the parent? How are you going to do that? The parent's going to find out. And guess what's going to happen? They're going to pull their kid out of school. And then we have burnt all of the bridges.
also, again,
we can't.
they are putting this together with gay outings too.
Yeah.
Which is in me
It
is
doesn't
totally
happen.
different.
Gay outings are totally different and they don't happen. We don't call parents to say your child was kissing a member of the same sex.
It used to happen. It did used to happen.
It did used to happen, but it
probably rarely happens now, at least in California for the most part.
And the like if you look at Chino school board and the language that they adopted said nothing about gay student outing. It was about notifying parents when there were suicidal ideation or a request for new bathrooms and pronouns. And I'm like,
the parents should know that.
Those are things that parents need to know. I've had to like contact parents when a kid like wrote something. I mean, and I don't just contact the parents. I contact the parents, the counselor, the mental health. I'm like, okay, your kid seems to have written some things that are very concerning. I mean, I'm not going to keep that from the parents to have like a new name and pronouns. Then we need to understand that this is a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
It is a mental health crisis.
And at the end of the day, the kid is not allowed to change anything legally without the parental notification or parental okay. Like, that's just the way it works.
But it's already going into our official records. And I'm like, well, don't the parents get to see that? Oh, no, that's for your eyes only. I'm like, okay, official record. I'm like, I'm so confused by it. And I tried to explain that. I'm like, we use this Aries system at school, and I can see the kid's new name and sometimes pronouns. Like, I don't know, but it is a very weird area right now. But the teachers believe that they're, whether it's the law or not, the teachers believe that they're not supposed to share that information already. They already believe that this is a private secret thing.
And even as an older, lesbian, was it pleasant to have a shitty parent who was homophobic? No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
But also, my mom didn't beat the crap out of me. I wasn't thrown out of the house. She was just real unpleasant, and tons and tons and tons of gay people have had to experience that, and we made it, and we're okay. What about also teaching that, you know what, just because your parent doesn't agree with what you're doing and can be shitty about it,
Yeah.
That's part of how it rolls sometimes.
Well, I think what's interesting is that it has shifted so much. Just in the past 15 years, our kids are very accepting at this point. Most of them. I mean, there's a couple of knuckleheads, but they're teenagers. They're gonna be.
Oh yeah, that's always gonna be
yeah, and we have to teach them, and
Well, I mean,
homophobia is allowed in my classroom, and if I hear something, I'm going to say something, and we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation, and
also, that just falls back on just a good anti-bullying policy, right? Just don't be shitty. Just teach your kids not to be shitty to other kids. Be polite. If you don't like the way somebody's doing, stay clear of them.
Yeah,
you don't need to pick on them. Just stay clear if it bothers you that much.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that.
We certainly can.
Have you gotten much flack or feedback after going publicly and speaking on this? How is your life?
Not yet, but the school is not in session.
That's true.
And I also don't know who will see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't. And I think that some of my union peers and colleagues might be upset to see that I did that, but I just hope that would make them interested in finding out more or make them curious.
Yeah.
I think for me, what hurts is the lack of curiosity and the lack of being open to understanding that there is a difference between transgender individuals and gay individuals and gender nonconformity and that we need to be able to have these conversations. And we also need to be able to talk very openly and directly and honestly about the medical harms, and that this is actually happening to young people.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to say thank you. And it's very appreciated to have, a lefty up there, doing this, because we do have to make our voices known. And especially, it's important because you have to push back against this propaganda that says that anybody who disagrees with this is some right-wing extremist.
I know.
And it's like, no, they're not.
No,
I'm
they're
sure
not.
there are some.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about the right. The right.
But what's happening is, if we allow this whole conversation to be in their hands, gay people are going to now lose their rights, because this is making things worse for gay people, because it's all now jumbled together as if it's one thing.
I know. And I already see the
backlash.
The backlash. I already see the backlash coming. I mean, I've already seen it. I see it happen on a small scale, very, very small, but some things start popping up. And I'm like, this concerns me.
Yeah.
When even some people that are supposed to be on your side start to say things that you heard homophobic people say 20 years ago, you kind of pause and go, now, wait a minute, sister.
I know.
Let's back up a little bit.
I feel like I'm having a few of those conversations now.
Yeah.
Let's be really careful that it is okay for people to wear what they want to wear. Like, I kind of go there a lot. I'm like, I don't want to be policing how people dress too much. I mean, I do think that there's got to be like some sort of like standards on some level, but not about having everybody be running around naked around the streets all the time. But I don't know. I guess in the Castro, if you want to be the naked dude out on the Castro, just everybody knows there's a naked dude out on the Castro.
Yeah.
You don't want to go there. If you don't want to see that, just stay away.
Well, I think what seems to get lost in so much of these conversations is context.
Yeah.
People tend to swing from one extreme to the other. And I'm telling you, it can be difficult to try to stay in the middle, but you do have to try to stay in the middle and keep the picture open, because you can get yourself in trouble if you go to one extreme to the other. Yeah.
And I try really, really carefully to make sure that I am not losing my edginess, not losing my former self and all of this.
Your cred.
But you can only see so many AGP videos and just be like, oh my Lord.
Yeah. And we have to be honest about
these men are not okay.
No. And we have to be honest about that aspect of it too.
Yeah.
It's the left needs to kind of come back around to really being about open conversation, being about understanding, being about learning, being about actual education, because education means you get lots of information from different places, and then you go through that and you go, okay, what works here, what makes sense.
And I think that's sort of my primary focus is education. I mean, I'm an educator.
Yeah.
And I've always sort of like been the person to be like, maybe we need to think a little bit more about this. And for a long time, I was the first one talking about a lot of the issues that our newcomer students were facing when they came here. And I was a big loudmouth about that, which may have pissed off a few people, right? But now a lot of the things that I was saying 10, 15 years ago are kind of now the gospel, right? So now here I am, maybe I'm on a new cutting edge of this stuff, but saying things that people are just not ready to hear.
Yeah.
And I do think that I do have a few people even within my own family that have kind of see what I'm saying as very dangerous. Had one sort of more far off family member called me an evangelist, I think I'm just like,
oh yeah, like an evangelical Christian or something.
Like, yes, I am all for the sexual functioning of young people. Therefore, I'm a crazy right-wing evangelist because I want people to have happy sex lives. How can you?
I know, isn't that
How can
weird?
You call me that?
For such a supposedly sex positive movement that the trans community likes to claim, they sure are taking the ability to have positive sex away from
Yeah,
so many
yeah,
individuals.
yeah. They really are.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for talking with me. Any final words before we?
No, it's just really nice to finally meet you, and, your conversations are always interesting, and, I think you give me hope, and I love your sort of you're very cheerful, and you've been through a lot too. I think your story is really interesting, and, I'm just glad you're here, and I'm glad you're here in California.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you're here too, right? We're just gonna keep fighting.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much.
All
Have a
right,
great
thank you.
rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.